we need to have a talk. I might get in trouble for saying this, but a lot of people are gonna make this mistake in the spring. And I really wanna save you the heartache of having a garden failure. We need to stop designing our gardens backwards. It always starts out with good intentions, but the choices we make now in the beginning will set us up for garden success or maybe garden headaches. A lot of times when we fail, we blame ourselves and we ask ourselves what we did wrong. When the truth is, sometimes it's just about making the right plant choices early on. So how do you make the right decisions about plants? Let's talk about it. I'm Lisa. I use a lot of North American plants, but trust me, this applies to garden design around the world. I want to set you up for planting success this season. So let's get it. When we start landscaping our home, we want to get inspiration. Maybe from magazines, maybe from making a board on Pinterest, pinning some of the most gorgeous flowers we've ever seen online. This is really fun to do, but sometimes it doesn't always help us in our actual garden planning. That's because we have no idea if these gorgeous flowers are even going to survive our climate, let alone thrive in our garden. This goes beyond the zone tag on the plant label. I want plants that are beautiful, but more importantly, I want plants that love our weather, that love our soil conditions, and will hopefully live for several years instead of dying at the end of the season and needing to be replaced. If we choose the plants first because we've fallen in love with them, and then we try to make it work in our garden without considering the sun hours or the soil conditions, we're designing the garden backwards. No one wants to hear this, but it's way easier to look at your soil, look at the sun hours or how much shade you have, and then choosing from a shorter list of very reliable plants for those conditions. You want a plant that's gonna love your location. It's much easier to do that than it is to change the earth and sky to make that plant happy. What do I mean change the earth and sky? Okay, when we till the soil, amend it with compost,
fertilize, mineralize, test, and maybe change the pH.
We're trying to change the earth. When we cut tree branches to let the light in and water our plants 3 times a week, we're trying to change the sky. We're trying to change the amount of water that falls from the sky, and we're changing the light that comes from the sky. This is actually very necessary if we want to grow crops like we do in our valuable agricultural areas or in our vegetable gardens. But at my house, I don't want to have to fuss over my flowers. That's where I draw the line. I mean, yes, gardeners love tending to our plants. We love messing around with them, and that's part of the hobby. You don't only want to choose plants because they're low maintenance, but there are hundreds of gorgeous plants to choose from. And there really is no reason to choose something that hates your yard and needs a ton of attention to grow. So instead of designing the garden backwards by choosing the plants first and then trying to match them to our garden somehow, I look at the garden site first, and then I choose the plants after, based on what will thrive in that site. Let's think of an example. Let's talk about shade. Now, shade is a sensitive topic, but let's be honest about how much shade we have. If you planted a few trees in the yard 10 or 15 years ago, you probably had a full sun garden until very recently. Things might have changed, and it's really worth taking an inventory of the total sun hours. So how do we figure out our sun hours? The only real way to know how many sun hours your garden really gets is to stay home one day, all day, maybe a Sunday, sometime in the summer between like May and August. The sun needs to be shining, not cloudy, because you're going to need to see whether there's a shadow on your garden. And if it's cloudy, you won't be able to see the shadow very well. Set a timer on your phone to go off once every hour from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And every hour, go out to the garden to see if the sun is shining directly on the garden or if there's a shadow. You'll need to record this, and so you'll make 2 columns on a piece of paper. If you want to see more in-depth videos on sun versus shade plant combinations, you can visit my Patreon at patreon.com/LisaLikesPlants. I have a new video there that's available to everyone for free. On your piece of paper, draw a sun in one column. I like to draw a sun instead of making an S because S can mean sun or shade, and then put a crescent moon in the other. So I put a sun and a crescent moon. Go outside and see if there's sun shining directly on the garden or if you see a shadow from a building, from trees. If you want to check multiple sites in your garden, you can make separate columns. Just make sure you separate those out so you don't get confused which is is which. Once you do this, you only have to do it once. You can add up the sun hours in your yard, and that will tell you exactly how many sun hours you have. You might be surprised that some of your garden areas have like 10 or 12 hours of full sun. And of course, some areas, if they're close to a building, maybe on the north side, if you're in the northern hemisphere, they might have only 2 or maybe 3 hours of sun. With this information, you can start looking for plants that specifically meet the requirements for sun hours. Okay, but we're not done yet because we need to know if our soil is wet or dry or somewhere in the middle. Now, the best way to find out if your soil is wet or dry is to take a spade and go out there and dig in the soil. Feel it in your hand. Does it feel dry? Is it crumbly? Is it sandy? That means it's dry. Is it wet? Is it clumping together? Is it like clay? That's more likely to be medium or moist soil. But we can also do some basic reasoning. Is this at the top of a hill? More likely to be dry because water flows downhill and the top of the hill is drier. Is this in full blasting sun all day? More likely to be dry. Is the area out in open air where it's very windy, there's no shrubs or trees? That is more likely to have conditions that are going to dry out your plants. For wet soil, we have the same questions. Is it in a high spot or a low spot? If it's in a low spot, is there sometimes standing water there occasionally after it rains? Is this in an area that's protected from wind so that it's a little bit more damp? Do you see moss? Do you see algae? These are all indications that you've got wet soil, aside from the fact that you really do need to dig in the soil and touch it with your fingers. If your garden is in a windy, sunny location that has dry, crumbly soil or maybe sandy soil, your plants are going to have a tendency to dry out fast. You might need drought-tolerant plants that are adapted to a prairie situation. They're just used to being out there in the sun and wind all day. So for example, I'm not going to plant a Hydrangea arborescens there and try to water it every single day to counteract the fact that I kind of chose the wrong plant for the wrong site. If I put a water-loving plant out in the hot sun and wind, I'm going to have a hell of a time trying to keep that thing alive. Instead, maybe I can plant something like a Hypericum, a shrubby St. John's wort, maybe some tall grasses or a hazelnut shrub. I've already committed to watering petunias every day in the summer, so I'm not dragging the hose out to water a shrub that I planted in the wrong place. That's way too much work. And here's the sad truth about that. Unfortunately, I think this is why people think they can't have large gardens, because they think it's going to be so much work, so much upkeep, so much effort, watering, fertilizing, mulching, and doing all that stuff all the time. No wonder people have lawns instead of gardens. But if you plan ahead and you select the right plants for the right place, your garden is going to be so green and healthy without you having to spend all day watering out there, because it gets hot in the middle of summer, and honestly, who wants to be doing that? The revolution. If you are growing a vegetable garden, growing dahlias, maybe a rose garden, those plants may not like your clay soil. You may have to till, amend with compost, fertilize, and water regularly because we're getting huge blooms. We're getting a very specialized flower that isn't native to where we are. But sometimes it's just worth it to us as gardeners because we love to grow them. Dahlias in particular, people are so interested in them. Even though they do take quite a bit of work, people are willing to put in the work because we're gardeners and we're willing to work for things that we love. But for native plant gardening and a lot of ornamental perennial gardens too, changing the soil so much is really overkill. The philosophy in native plant gardening is a tough one. Most of us agree that if a plant is struggling where it's planted, maybe it doesn't belong there. And instead of babying the plant, trying aggressively to get it to grow where it clearly doesn't want to, maybe we should pull that plant and plant it somewhere else or give it away and plant something else in its place that really wants to be there. It sounds simple, but this is revolutionary in gardening. We've sort of been raised to think that if a plant isn't doing well, it's our fault. It's that we're not taking care of it properly.
We're not fertilizing it enough. We aren't watering enough. Or we watered it too much. We didn't prune it at the right time. Like, we've all been through this.
Most of the time, it's because we got the wrong plant in the wrong place. This took me way too long to learn. I really wanted to choose the plants that I wanted first because of their beauty. I was so excited looking at different kinds of beautiful flowers that I didn't consider that maybe those flowers don't like my garden, and that maybe I need to look at my soil first before choosing the plants. I needed to look at my sun hours first before planting something that's destined to grow slowly, become leggy, and push out 2 little blooms at the top because it's just in too shady a spot. It would have saved me a lot of time and wasted money. Just because I want a Hydrangea arborescens there doesn't mean it wants to live there. We are in collaboration with these plants. Whether it's a native plant garden, a conventional ornamental garden, or something in between, there are a lot of gardeners who have more experience experience than I do who are watching this right now, and they know that it's better to work with nature than against it, when possible. I love having a big garden, and I'm so proud of how independent my plants are. They didn't need me to fertilize them thousands of years ago when they lived here on their own, and they don't need me to take care of them now, for the most part. If you want to see some plants that love shade or sun, my website is lisalikesplants.com, and I have 2 pages with some native plants for sun, native plants for shade if you want to take a look. I also have a video here about gardening in the shade if you want some plant combinations. I'll link it in the description below. If you'd like to participate in our Real Yards series, send a few photos of your yard to info_likesplants@gmail.com. Make sure the photos are in landscape or sideways, not in portrait, not vertical. Tell us the location of your home, and make sure you let us know that it's okay for us to use your photo in the video. Your home might get picked as a feature for our Real Yards design. Thanks so much to everyone who's participated. It's been really fun so far.